So we're going to look at The Planners by Boey Cheng. He's a really amazing poet, Boey Cheng. I've only come across him kind of randomly while I've been doing analysis for poetry collections. I've never actually bought a full book of his poetry, but I really, really should do that because, yeah, every poem that I've read by him has been very complex, thoughtful, very kind of intellectual, like it thinks deeply about quite abstract ideas. He's Singaporean, so he has this really interesting sort of double Western Eastern perspective on society and the world and that type of thing. So he's very kind of technical, I think, with how he approaches things. Like he's not an emotional or personal poet. He talks more about big ideas, or the poems that I've read by him do. But yeah, they're always very clever and they always make me think a lot. And so if you like this poem, I'd really recommend actually reading a few of his other ones as well. The main other one that I teach is The Reservist, which is a completely different topic. It's like a war poem. It's really clever, really interesting. So yeah, The Planners, hopefully you enjoy this one because I really like this poem. I think it's great. So because it's in copyright, I can't actually read the poem to you. So I want you to just read the poem aloud to yourself. There's some really gross teeth imagery in the documents with this one, so I'm just warning you in advance. There is a reason for that. It's kind of trying to capture the tone that he has in his poem. This kind of like grotesque idea of teeth, because he talks about buildings being like rows of teeth. So there's some vocab here. You can have a look through this vocab just so that you understand what it means, and then read the poem aloud to yourself and try and underline key images or ideas as you go. And then when you're ready, we can come back to the lesson and jump into the story. Yeah, so the story is pretty simple, really. I mean, it's sort of difficult to follow while you're reading it as a poem, but it's quite a basic concept. So it's about the city planners. It's just called The Planners, but they're specifically city planners. They plan, they build. Everything is filled with different possibilities, but the spaces are gridded. They're kind of portioned out mathematically. Buildings are in alignment with roads. They're linked by bridges. So it's all hyper mathematical and regular. They will not stop. Even the sea draws back and the skies surrender. So they build up and they build out. They get rid of the blemishes of the past. They knock off useless blocks with tooth-like dexterity. Gaps are plugged with gleaming gold. The country wears perfect rows of shining teeth. Anesthesia, amnesia, hypnosis. So there's a sense of erasure of the past, which is such an important idea to Boey Cheng. We'll have a look at that a bit more later. And they keep drilling down and building upwards, which again is why he's using a tooth imagery, because you drill down into teeth and then you kind of pull them out when they're rotten and you replace them with like neat new teeth that are kind of fake. Yeah, and he kind of ends in this curious way. My heart wouldn't bleed poetry, not a single drop to stain the blueprint of our past tomorrow. So it's about kind of the lack of inspiration that this type of world creates. If you've never seen Singapore, I recommend just looking up a few images of it now so that you know how it looks. But it's, yeah, a giant metropolis. So it's very, very modern. Tons of skyscrapers, tons of like, cutting edge technology, the way that it's built. But Boey Cheng is saying, well, there's no history, there's no culture, there's no tradition. We've eroded or erased all of our past. And how can we build a future that way when everything's just new and it's just about kind of building it now? So he's hypercritical of the lack of history and culture in places like Singapore, which are kind of fast-moving, growing cities. So, yeah, It's about Singapore, but you can apply it to any large city. There's parts of London that are definitely like this, parts of New York that are definitely like this. They have kind of the older areas as well, so they're a bit more balanced. But yeah, Singapore is kind of like hyper modern. I think in Asia they tend to do it a little bit more sometimes, where they kind of efface their tradition to try and just move forward as fast as possible. So yeah, it feels like the poet has this kind of insight, like he's more of a prophet or a kind of visionary figure who has a lot more awareness of what's really going on with this city on a like large scale than the average person who lives there. So then most people just kind of, you know, go about their day or go to the job. They don't really think about how is the city being built and how is it planned and developed. So this the speaker of the poem is more of a visionary. He has this much more kind of complex intellectual overarching relationship with his whole city in the way that it's changing and developing over time. So it feels like sometimes a bit lonely for him. He also says his heart would not bleed poetry for the city, almost like it's not worth him spending his time and energy on this city because it's so new and it's got no inspiration there. There's nothing really that makes him feel powerfully like he needs to write about it. So it's a hypercritical poem. It's not an emotional poem at all. It doesn't create like, a love for his city or a bond to the city. Instead, it's about disconnection and objective criticism. There's a sense of numbness and paralysis with those words like anesthesia, which mirror the sort of medical imagery of the poem, and all of those convey, I think, the poet's own reaction to city. Just feels numb about it. He doesn't know what to say. He feels like there's nothing much to say because there's no beauty, no care, no tradition, no history. So there's no emotional investment on the speaker's part. So everything is meticulously, precisely planned. It's kind of mathematical and regular and perfect, which he doesn't like. So if you're doing the Cambridge collection, Margaret Atwood has a poem called The City Planners. You might want to go read that one. It's very, very similar to this one, but it's about a different kind of like a suburban Canadian environment rather than a big Asian metropolis. But the same sort of idea, same sort of criticism about city planning and the way that cities start to look if you just try and make them regular and ordered. So yeah, there's no imperfection of history, and there's just gleaming, luxurious new structures like a perfect grin on the country. And it's as if the past never existed. And so it's kind of like, okay, we're obsessed with perfection and regularity and, scientific and technological advancement, but at what cost? Because we're getting rid of the imperfections of history. We're getting rid of the chaos and the complexity of life, which, is contained within the structures and buildings of a city, the memories of people that live there. There's no soul, there's no beauty, there's no art that would perform, the inspiration or provide the inspiration for poetry. So it's quite sad, really, I think, that it's just pragmatic, it's practical. These teeth are particularly crazy. I think they're from a robot. But yeah, I was trying to give you this kind of like slightly horror vibe with this one because I think that's sort of what he's trying to go for. There's a lot of techniques here. You can kind of have a look at these in more detail, and also go to the Scribbly page to download this document if you need more help with it. And there's a full course there as well that you can have a look at for Cambridge. So yeah, we'll kind of whiz through the techniques. The structure, free verse. So it's kind of more irregular, more random, and I think that's kind of a resistance against the regularity of the city and against the regularity of the city planners. So Boey Kim Cheng is saying, I'm not like these planners. I'm an artist, I'm a creative. I embrace regularity, chaos, randomness. I don't try and put things into regular structures. So yeah, it's about culture, history, rather than technology, materialism. There's Sajora as well. They plan, they build. You've got these kind of gaps, these really clear, uh, marked, delineated short sentences here, which for me are kind of evocative of the structure of those teeth, like these regular, contained patterns of lines of sentences. Yeah, the ending has an oxymoronic phrase which is quite complex. Our past tomorrow. So I'm just going to unpick that for you now. So a blueprint is a kind of blue map that you kind of have on a table with white lines all over it, and it's meant to be the kind of plan or layout for a structure that you're creating. So you see blueprints a lot in architecture, for example. They're like really big blue drawings. And he talks about the idea of a blueprint, which is to do with planning and development of our past's tomorrow. So there's this connection between past, present, and future that is being completely lost by the way that these cities are planned and the way that they're kind of pushing forwards and erasing the past as they go. So the poem really is about how important cultural heritage is, even though there's no cultural heritage in the poem itself. The lack of cultural heritage there is terrifying to the poet and uninspiring, and creates a disconnection with tradition and the roots of your heritage and your culture. So he's very much advocating for culture and for art and the importance of tradition and history. So instead of maximum profit and optimized functionality, we should probably slow down and focus more on our tradition, our past, maybe some mistakes and errors and imperfections as well, because that kind of perfect regular world is so unnatural and so kind of, I don't know, unemotional, I think. So yeah, a couple of context points just quickly then. So it's quite interesting that planners are a little bit like gods who mold the city in their own practical image, but they're also constrained by the laws of physics or mathematics, time, and finance. But it's kind of all of those pressures create this sense of absolute regularity, so they just don't exactly like they just get rid of the beauty and the kind of more sublime elements of city planning, and they just make it purely functional. The idea that they drill through the fossils of last century is that they just kind of smash up history and culture and tradition. So it's interesting that Boey Kim Cheng actually left Singapore, even though he's born there, moved to Australia, because he just did not like the vibe. He just didn't. He felt like it's too way too constrained, way too kind of modernist and not traditional. So he was kind of annoyed with the status of literature and culture in Singapore and the lack of it, basically. So he was for quite a long time living in Singapore as a poet, but then he decided to move to Australia in order to kind of get away from the constraints and the claustrophobia of that type of environment. So yeah, Shirley Lim said that he's the greatest post 1965 English language poet in the Republic. So he's kind of like, one of the greatest Singaporean poets, or kind of multi, like Asian, Anglo-English, or that type of thing, like British merging with Asian culture poets. There's actually a very strong cultural resistance of poetry and art in Singapore, but it's a very hidden undercurrent to that's kind of like responding to the normal average person. So it's very, very interesting. There's another poet that I write or kind of do analysis of, called Arthur Yap, and he's another one he's a really brilliant poet from Singapore. So if you're interested in Singaporean poetry, look at some other Boey Kim Cheng poetry poetry, and also Arthur Yapp. He's another one that left as well. He moved to England. So yeah, I did tell you to do this already, but you might want to do this as a task. So look at the images of Singapore and maybe jot down a few notes about how they reflect the imagery of the poem. There's a few kind of key feelings or attitudes here. So skeptical, like he's skeptical about the utility or the goodness of what's being done. He's annoyed by this idea that, you know, the planning is just going ahead mindlessly and it's disrupting tradition and history. He's really frustrated because he would like to be part of a more artistic, creative, inspirational community, and he's just not, because the environment he's in is not conducive to it. So there's a lot of themes here. You might want to spend some time going through and unpicking these themes in detail and making mind maps for some of them with quotations and analysis and that kind of thing. It really helps you prep for essays if you do that. And then when you're ready, you can try these exercises and essay questions as well. So if you want to download this document, or you want more help with English generally or literature specifically, or this poetry collection, you can go to scribbly.com, where we've got loads of resources on there, including downloadable documents and loads of video lessons as well. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this one. I really like it. I think it's very clever. It's kind of a stark, bleak poem, but a very powerful message, and very well articulated, I think. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you guys soon.